They told me to hand over my entire client list. In a moment, my heartbeat raced, my mind flooded with 1,000 possible outcomes. If I handed it over, I risked everything I'd built. If I refused, I knew there would be consequences. But what happened next wasn't what they expected. I surrendered something else, and the effect was far more powerful than the list itself. I'm about to take you step by step from the beginning, how I got into the situation, what I opted to surrender instead, and how it flipped the dynamics entirely. At first glance, it seems like I lost control. At first glance, it looks like I gave in. But make no mistake, I was orchestrating a move. And by the end, you'll see why surrendering the client list would have been the losing move and why what I surrendered instead became the winning move. So buckle in, because we're going from simple context to advanced strategy, showing you how to turn pressure into power, how to flip the script when someone demands your assets, your relationships, your data. And if you've ever felt vulnerable or under the gun, this story is for you. Let's go. I'll start with how this all began. I had been working steadily for a client, building trust, refining processes, growing results. One day I got that message. Hand over your client list by end of week. No negotiation. It felt like a punch. I didn't know what the request meant for me, for my business, for the relationships I had built. I stood there thinking, do I comply? Do I push back? I weighed the risks. They could cut ties, they could go directly to the clients, bypass me altogether. But on the flip side, I asked myself, what do they really want? Is it the list, or is it the leverage the list gives them? That question changed everything. I stepped back. I didn't panic. I didn't immediately give permission. Instead, I prepared. And in that preparation, something started shifting, the entire power dynamic. That's where the story begins. Stay with me. It's important to understand why the client list held so much weight. On the surface, it's just names and contact info. But beneath that, it's trust, it's network, it's access, everything you've earned. When someone demands your client list, they're asking for more than data. They're asking for the relationships, the pipelines, the doors you've knocked on. They want the fruit of your labor. And for me, handing it over would have meant handing over years of goodwill, credibility, and future opportunity. I realized that the client list was symbolic of my value, my role as the connector, the trusted agent. They demanded the list because they wanted to reduce me to an execution arm. They wanted to cut out the middleman. But I refused to be the middleman without the value. That's when I asked myself, what can I surrender that still gives me the control? What can I surrender that triggers their need to keep me involved? I began crafting what I call the surrender pivot. First, I documented the relationships. Not just names, but context, what had been built, where the trust lay, what each client needed. Then I proposed a different offering. Instead of handing over the raw list, I would create a joint framework. They would get access to the clients, but only through me. I shifted from an owner of the list to the gatekeeper with value. I was still in the driver's seat. They thought they were asking for the list, but I gave something else. Something even more valuable to them, my mediation. That moved the leverage into my hands. And the moment I did that, the conversation changed. They stopped just asking for the list and started negotiating for the structure. I surrendered a part, but I gained control of the process. That's how the basic level of this story works. They make a demand, you realize the deeper leverage, you shift the surrender to your advantage. That is the foundation. Let me rewind further. How did I build that list in the first place? What investment went into those relationships? That context helps you see why giving it away lightly was never an option. Years of outreach, trust building, service delivery. I had spent time listening rather than selling, focusing on value rather than quick wins. That meant each client knew me, my methods, my voice. I had positioned myself as more than a supplier, as a strategic partner. And that meant when someone came to me and demanded the list, they weren't just demanding names, they were demanding me. So before surrendering anything, I assessed, what is the relationship I want to preserve? What role do I want to play in the next chapter? I asked myself, do I want to be cut out or do I want to be essential? That shifted my mindset immediately. I drafted my value proposition. If they want access to the clients, great, but only if I remain the person they come through. I explained to them, you can have the list, but the results will drop, the trust will drop, the momentum will suffer. Because the list isn't the magic, my involvement is. I used language they recognized: risk, continuity, revenue. I leveraged their fear of disruption and loss. That reframing changed the dynamic. I moved from being on the defensive, someone demanding something from me, to being on the offensive, someone offering something to them. And that is the key lesson at this level. When someone demands your asset, you don't just give it, you reinterpret its value, you reposition yourself as the value. That's how you secure your relevance. And once that shift happened, the rest of the story unfolded. Now we reached the turning point. They accepted my counterproposal. They agreed to grant access, but threw me under my terms. At that moment, the client list demand transformed into something else, a partnership opportunity. Suddenly, we began arranging calls, introducing clients, coordinating deliverables. I put myself back into the loop. They were expecting me to hand over control. Instead, I kept control. That's when things started going better than expected. I had surrendered the idea of handing over the list, but I gained the idea of being indispensable. I became the bridge between the client and the corporation. They needed me more than the list alone. And I knew it. From that point, I delivered beyond expectations. I overcommunicated, I aligned goals, I ensured every client felt continuity. I leveraged my relationships to deliver fast, strong results, making the underscore company, their side, look like heroes. And when people ask, what did you surrender? The answer is, I surrendered the simple concession, the list, to achieve the bigger win: control, value, positioning. But I didn't just stop there. I documented the process, I kept the momentum, I converted this arrangement into something scalable. They started to view me as a strategic asset rather than just a service provider. This stage reveals the core of the story, surrendering not your asset, but your mindset of victimhood.
You surrender the notion that you are forced to comply.
You adopt the notion that you are negotiating from strength. And that change rippled across the entire relationship. Let's talk about the mechanics of what I surrendered. This isn't about giving something away lightly. It's about giving something that appears significant but is part of your strategy, not your foundation. I offered transparency. I shared client summaries, performance dashboards, access to platform results. I offered a transitional schedule. But I kept ownership of the relationship, the communication, the ongoing value delivery. In effect, I surrendered the symbol, the list, while retaining the substance, the relationship. That subtle yet powerful distinction is where many people fail. They hand over both. They think asset equals value. But you have to separate your asset from your value. Asset can be given. Value stays with you. The surrender needs to be intentional. I called up the stakeholders, I laid out the timeline, I put a contract in place. I said, here's how you'll get your access. Here's how we'll operate. I allowed them to feel like they were winning by receiving the list-style asset, but in reality, I maintained the seat at the table. I created roles, responsibilities, communication cadence. I ensured they saw me as part of the infrastructure. This meant they couldn't just bypass me later, without losing momentum. This stage is intermediate in the story. We're moving from baseline to strategy. Many people stop at they asked, I handed over. But that's where you lose. We're going beyond that. We're using the surrender as leverage. We're transforming demand into dependency. And that's the shift that matters. Now, advanced territory. While the structure was in place, I began layering value. I started crafting new offers, bundling services, showing them future projections. Because control isn't just about who holds the list, it's about who holds the roadmap. I leveraged my role to propose next phase projects. I said, since I'm already working with your clients, I can help scale this, I can help integrate services, I can manage launch campaigns. They had access to the list, but I had the vision. I created a pipeline review. I identified gaps. I framed the opportunity for them. They weren't just getting clients, they were getting growth. And I was positioned to benefit. I also tightened alignment. We set KPIs together, we reviewed performance monthly, I inserted reporting mechanisms. They were delighted because it looked like we were working in lockstep. But because I held the relationships, they still relied on me. I created referrals, loyalty programs, connection frameworks that only I could orchestrate. Meanwhile, the list remained accessible, but without me it would stagnate. So the control remained. This is advanced strategy. The list becomes a vehicle. You become the driver. The other party becomes the passenger. If you can position yourself like that, you don't just protect your asset, you amplify it. And that's exactly what happened. I didn't just survive the demand, they ended up needing me more than I needed them. Let's dive into mindset, because without the right mindset, none of this works. When someone demands your asset, you might feel cornered. You might feel reactive. But your best move is proactive. First, you recognize that demand isn't just about the asset, it's about power. It's about control. When I got that demand for the list, for a moment I had two choices: freeze or negotiate. I chose negotiation. I chose to shift from responder to architect. I repositioned myself from subject to partner. That made all the difference. You can't play the same game they expect you to play. You have to redefine the game. You have to reshape the terms. And you do that by seeing your value, articulating your value, and making yourself essential. Another mindset shift: surrender doesn't equal defeat. If you give away your asset without thinking, yes, you lose. But if you give away strategically, you can win. That's a major mental switch. I surrendered the list because handing over the list in itself wasn't the win. The win was keeping the narrative, the relationships, the control. So I reframed the story in my mind. This is not they asked, I gave. This is they asked, I delivered differently. I had the posture of abundance. I wasn't scrambling. I wasn't hiding. I was opening a path. That mindset made me calm, confident, strategic. And because I behaved that way, the reception from them changed. They respected that I wouldn't just capitulate. They respected the clarity of my terms. Because of that, the negotiation changed from give list or else into let's partner with these rules. Here's where we unfold the results and why this matters. Because once the structure was in motion, the clients got served, the performance went up, the trust strengthened. The party who thought they were forcing terms ended up being thankful for the arrangement. The relationship with the client list grew stronger, not weaker. And I secured an ongoing role that was more sustainable than handing over the list would have been. Clients ask me, will things change? My answer: yes, for the better. I kept transparency, I kept continuity. They saw me as the stable anchor. As a result, we avoided disruption. We avoided churn. And the business on the other side achieved faster growth than it expected. I created value they didn't anticipate. And that meant I wasn't just retained, I was elevated. From their point of view, they got more than they asked for. They got a partner who was invested in success. They got streamlined access, faster results, less friction. But from my point of view, the win was securing my role, my business, my future. Because the list didn't vanish, but I did more than protect it, I leveraged it. And that's the point I want you to walk away with. When someone demands something you've built, don't retreat. Don't simply hand over. Instead, think, how can I give something that appears to satisfy the demand but actually positions me for the next level? Use pressure as an invitation. Use demand as a negotiation point. Use surrender as a lever. That's how you flip the story. Now I want to share practical steps, because this applies beyond client lists. Maybe someone demands your team, your data, your formula, your code, your contacts. The same pattern works. Step 1. Identify the real leverage behind the request. They might ask for your asset, but what they really want is access, control, speed, network. Step 2. Map out your role in delivering those outcomes. What do you offer that's unique? What relationships? What credibility? What trust? Step 3. Design a surrender that gives something visible but preserves your value. It might be a transition plan, it might be co-ownership, it might be a dual access model. Step 4. Articulate the terms. Don't go silent. Set the structure. Make it clear. Step 5. Follow through by delivering and elevating. Don't just renegotiate, make them grateful. Because when you deliver, your value becomes evident and entrenched. In my case, the client list was the visible asset. I kept the hidden asset, my role. And that's what you should always protect. When you choose how you surrender, you actually shape your future. Don't let others define it for you. Don't let demand force you into vulnerability. And don't assume the asset they ask for is the whole game. Often the game is much bigger. When you see that, you shift from giving to negotiating, from reacting to designing, from surviving to winning. And that's when you elevate the narrative. That's when you win the greater battle. So, as you move forward, think, what is the asset I'm being asked for? What is the value I hold beyond that asset? And how can I surrender in a way that secures the value? Finally, let's tie it all together with the transformation and what this story means. I began under pressure, a demand to hand over my client list. That felt like a threat, but I didn't fold. Instead, I analyzed, reframed, negotiated that I surrendered something visible, but structured it so that I retained what mattered.